All right. Good afternoon, guys, on the East Coast. Good afternoon on the West Coast as well. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for joining us. Apologies, we're having a slight glitch just in the beginning, but as you will know, uh, for today's show, we have a special show for you today. Instead of it being kind of the run-of-the-mill, conversation that we have with special guests, we actually will be doing a panel tonight, a virtual panel, if you will, working with HarleCon. So I want to thank HarleCon for working with us in order to get this panel up and running. So without further ado, let me introduce each of our panelists. One sec. So first and foremost, the first panelist that I want to introduce, they are the creator of the Glyph-nominated webcomic Ants. They're also the co-creator of Long Boxes on 22, one of the original amalgamations of comic books, hip-hop, pop culture. And when he's not creating comics, he is also a film critic. He is a Rotten Tomatoes approved critic, not only with Punch Drunk Critics, but also with Adobe Radio. So without further ado, let me introduce Julian Lytle. Bring him on. How you doing,
Hello.
Julian?
How's it going, Brandon?
Good, good, good. All right, so let me introduce our next panelist as well. So the next person that we have on tap, our next panelist, they are the Associate Director of Medical Student Education and Psychiatry at GW, so George Washington University in DC. He's been awarded with the American Medical Association Foundation Leadership Award and the Caring Education Excellence Award, for his work in substance abuse and addictions. He's also a member of the Washington, D.C. Physician Health Program. So without further ado, I want to introduce our other panelists for tonight, or say for this afternoon, Dr. Charles Seminole. Let me bring him on. How you doing, Charles?
Hey there, good to see you. It's fun to be back.
Awesome, awesome. Yes, indeed. It is definitely fun to be back for this third edition of Arkham Files. It is crazy that we can now officially say we have a trilogy of panels, but here we are. All right, so for those of you out there, for Arkham Files, the purpose of this panel is to discuss a couple of villains, to be able to hypothesize some ideas about these characters. And here we go. Hypothesize some ideas about these characters. I have the panelists here to help fill in the blanks for some of the iterations of many of these characters that we've had throughout pop culture, but also to give a real world idea of perhaps some psychosis that they would suffer from if they functioned here in the real world. But first, before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Samenow so he can share some ideas about diagnosis. So give me 1 second, Charles, and then you can take it away. All right, sir, all yours.
Oops, there we go. I am unmuted. So I am going to keep it really, really brief for the folks in the audience tonight, because my feeling is you all know these characters inwards and outwards, and I'm going to serve mainly as a psychiatric consultant to help guide you on whether your feelings and thoughts about these characters, who every time I do this, I'm so impressed with the details that folks bring. So when I'm looking at making a diagnosis, obviously I'm using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We won't get into a debate tonight about the pros and the cons, just simply to say that there are pros to using the book, but certainly there are cons. And perhaps as we start talking about some of our characters, those will be brought to the forefront. The funny thing, I just put this in here because with everything going on in the political arena, there's a rule that prohibits psychiatrists from diagnosing individuals we've never evaluated or never met, people who are in the media, perhaps politicians per se. But today we'll make an exception to that. I'm not worried about any of our supervillains coming back and suing me. Perhaps they'll do other things to me that won't be so great. But we will do an exception to the Goldwater rule and talk about them in a diagnostic manner, even though we have not officially evaluated them. And finally, what I'm looking for when I'm saying, hey, how does this differ from normal human behavior? Does the person evidence something that's dangerous? Is it completely deviant from what we would expect in society? Does the individual show distress, or does it somehow cause dysfunction in their life? Most of these supervillains, they don't show much distress, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, we're looking at danger, deviance, and dysfunction. Common among most of our characters who are here in the asylum, and I'm actually here at a hospital tonight. I'm not in costume. I am on our inpatient unit and taking a little break away from that. No worries. There's plenty of coverage, so our patients are getting good care. But in our Arkham Asylum, we're going to be focusing a lot on antisocial personality disorder, which is criminality, narcissistic personality disorder, the individuals who believe the world revolves around them, delusional disorder. A lot of these villains have fixed false beliefs that don't match with reality. And then what's really, really interesting, and I think is so great about the authors of these comics, whether it be in the on the page, in print, or in the media, is the trauma that these individuals experienced and explaining how they came to be who they are. But I think across all of them, all of our villains, we're going to see the antisocial personality disorder, impulsivity, aggressiveness, disregard for the safety of others, irresponsibility, and most importantly, a lack of remorse. But these characters are far more complex than just the common hardened criminal. There is lots of psychopathology, and I look forward to discussing it with you tonight as we go through 3 different characters. Brandon, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. So the first villain that I want to bring up, and let me get ourselves out of this here. So yes, the first patient, if you will, that I would like to cover or have us cover is the ventriloquist, aka Scarface, otherwise known as Arnold Wesker. Let me bring him up here. All right. So Mr. Wesker, to give you a brief synopsis, I know there are a lot of folks out there that are, have a general gist of what he's about, but if not, that's fine. Just a brief synopsis on him. He is as the name suggests, a ventriloquist with multiple personalities. He goes by the moniker Scarface in that persona that he has with the puppet, who under that influence, he is a dangerous and ruthless boss. In most instances, he is an individual who's identified again as someone who suffers from dissociative identity disorder or having multiple personalities. However, in other instances, there have been instances, from what I understand, where it's implied that the ventriloquist, otherwise known as Arnold Wesker, uses this persona as a means to, I guess you can say, have an excuse to really act on those darker impulses. But as I said, immediate diagnosis that comes to mind for me is that dissociative identity disorder. But before we hop into that, Julian, I'll pass it along to you just to kind of give an idea of this character. Anytime you're ready.
Yeah, so he appeared post-crisis in the late 80s. A set of new villains that they used to terrorize Batman and Robin at the time. I think we was in the middle of Robin's when he really came to prominence. A lot of the origin deal with the fact he has a lot of repressed feelings of anger and from abuse, and that leads into it coming through the dummy. He kind of taught himself how to be a ventriloquist. He's from a crime family, sometimes not. The dummy is usually always portrayed as a 1920s gangster, specifically Al Capone's moniker of Scarface. Usually always a middle-aged guy, an older guy with the puppet. In the cartoon series The Batman, they decided to update a little bit and make him look like Tony Montana from the Scarface film starring Al Pacino. But generally, as within the two different identities, Wesker is never dominant. He is abused by the puppet. He doesn't talk. Scarface does all the talking. He's abusive. He uses a Tommy gun, but also that personality has the criminal strategist mind. He's able to, take out territory and war with the other factions in Gotham for the streets. So he's died, and of course, because of the nature of DC Comics, things have been rebooted. So sometimes he's back, sometimes he's not. We're in another one of those phases where things are changing, so he can come back or not. Who knows? But he's a pretty interesting character. He's one of the few characters where you don't completely feel sorry for him. You do understand why he would go into Arkham Asylum instead of Blackgate Prison or any of the other prisons where they put other superheroes, supervillains, compared to some of the other people that Batman may face where you're like, they actually don't even deserve to be in an asylum. Like sometimes Catwoman is in an asylum. It's like, she's not crazy. She just steals things. But, that's about the basic gist of the ventriloquist.
All right, awesome. So, with all this information, I know we want to try to see if we have some folks that come in with some questions. But while we await that, I guess just right off the bat, from what you have there, Charles, and gathering, that information about him having those two personalities competing, and is he or isn't he, crazy, or is it a situation where it's it could be argued, okay, you're just using it as an excuse to kind of to act on a lot of these impulses that you have. What are your thoughts on that? Is that in the right mindset to think of dissociative identity disorder as the main thing, or is there more at play here?
There we are. I'm unmuted. Yeah. So, it's interesting. This is a very, very complex character. And, of course, Julian has such a wealth of information about these characters. It just always amazes me, the details. There's a few interesting things. There's a weird relationship here. My understanding is that the ventriloquist, the doll, was owned by someone else. And then he killed that person and got the doll. And so the question is it truly multiple personality? Is this doll sometimes the original person, who I think his name was Donegan, versus Wesker? Like, who does this doll, which persona does it take on? In true dissociative identity disorder, they wouldn't know details about each other. And I think there's some debate about the doll, whether he really is distinct personalities or whether the doll actually is able to remember and recall and flip between these personalities. But in true dissociative identity disorder, the personality wouldn't remember when it's one personality, it wouldn't remember important details about another personality. And perhaps, Julian, through all the different iterations of this, will know examples of when that was the case or when there wasn't. But there's a few other really interesting things. I mean, of course, there's criminality here. There's killing. There's drug dealing. I know there was a drug called fever that they spread and then dealt with. So there's the classic criminal stuff. But then there's trauma. My understanding is the way that a lot of this started was when Wesker was taken down, I think, to the docks and saw an albatross, and his parents were killed in front of him, and then grew to believe that albatross was a omen of bad things. And so there's a huge trauma history. So we have potentially traumatic related disorders. We have potentially dissociative identity, which is closely linked to trauma. So really, again, kudos to the authors of really getting it right, that dissociative identity comes from trauma. And then there is this very fascinating thing about, is there dependent personality? Wesker and this and the ventriloquist puppet, they need each other. They rely on each other. In fact, the letter B, I believe, he can't pronounce without the puppet. So he's totally dependent for certain things. And so that's an interesting area to explore. And then the final area, and we'll turn it over to the audience, is there shared delusionality? There's a fascinating thing in psychiatry, I've rarely ever seen it, called folie à deux, which is a delusion that two people share together. And they have a fixed false belief about reality, but the two of them symbiotically work together in this delusion. So this guy is really complex. I think he definitely belongs in a mental hospital, not a prison, because we have so many possible psychopathology. But you all are the experts. You know him a lot better than me. So I guess, what questions, observations, or comments do you all have?
Let me put it on here. All right. So so for those of you that are out there watching, feel free, don't be shy. If you have any questions regarding a lot of these characters that we're covering right now, it is the ventriloquist, aka Scarface, and perhaps some instances of how the villain was executed throughout pop culture. Feel free to ask your questions. We will move on to the next villain, because it looks like we have some folks that are slightly shy, but it's okay. We will, like I said, feel free, to ask whatever questions you have, and we can always, rewind it and come back to that question. So with that being said, moving on to the next villain that we have on tap. Bring him up really quick. Let's see our friend. Let's see. So the next person that we have on tap is Clayface. And let me bring him up here. Give me one sec. All righty. So just to give a quick rundown of Clayface, many folks are aware of this character. However, just to give you a quick synopsis on him, let me bring up just a quick idea for him. So he was an actor who was driven mad when he heard that there was a remake of the film that he was starring in being done. He is otherwise known as, and let me bring him up here. In the iterations that we have in the comics, he is given the abilities of being able to copy a lot of the physical appearance of anyone that he takes on. So like right off the bat, this character in overall provides an interesting challenge versus many of the other characters that we've done, because unlike many of the other characters, he can actually change his appearance even down to the DNA itself. So whether he's male, female, it doesn't matter. He's able to take on that appearance. So that whole idea of gender and what is gender comes into play with this character. But before we get into perhaps some psychological aspects, bring on Julian real quick just to get your thoughts on this guy. Give me one sec. All right, take it away, Julian.
So yeah, Clayface is an interesting character. He's one of the oldest Batman villains. There's the one you spoke about, which is considered Clayface 1. Basil Karlo, which is a play on two famous actors' names from the golden age of film. And that one didn't even really have powers. He was literally just like a dude. He put on a mask. He's not that much different from like Ghostface in the Scream films. He goes around, he just starts murking people because he's salty. It's the second one, Matt Hagen's, where things get interesting. It's like an adventurer, a thief. He finds like a magical cave because this is the 50s, and he gets the stuff where he could turn around and turn into people. He's probably the most dominant and the name is the one that's most used in cartoons, especially Batman animated series. You then get the Clayface 3, which is a scientist who tries to take some of his blood to basically replicate his powers. He becomes a different type of Clayface where he melts people. Then there was like a lady Clayface that basically was part of like a bad guy team that like kind of faced the outsiders. Is reminiscent of the team of super people that was in the last season of Black Lightning from Markovia and such stuff like that. Even though it's not one-to-one, it's not exact, but it's similar in terms of the makeup. The last two Clayfaces ended up meeting the first Clayface and make a team to kill Batman. They fell in love or to a degree, and they had a kid, which is the fifth Clayface. Fifth Clayface really isn't that bad. I think if I'm sure he was the one actually part of the of Batwoman's team of Detective Comics not too long ago. But yeah, the whole identity thing, like the first one is clearly a dude, because basically he was a guy in a mask. There's Lady Clayface. The third one is kind of like not really a shapeshifter, but Matt Hagen, especially the way he's portrayed sometimes in other media, the way in which he turns into so many different people, him losing himself, being an actor, they kind of merge two things together. And the fifth one, which is a play on, he has the name that's a play on Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali's original name. I just think that identity is Clayface. I think they become people sometimes that get lost. They usually play sometimes with the nature of being able to lose a piece, and that piece can become their own person sometimes, or not, or control other people. That's where Clayface leads to a lot of creators to have their way with them in terms of just doing whatever they want. Sometimes disregarding what happened before. But the nature of what's going on with Clayface and who deserves what, and each one has different issues and problems. Some put upon by themselves, and some just through the circumstance of like the fifth one of just you being born a shapeshifter. Like what are you if you're born a shapeshifter? Like what does anything matters? Like you're just either this big mud thing or like you're whatever you want to be whenever you want to be it. You know, I don't know if anybody's really played with that effectively yet, but it's a new decade and a new millennium, so I have a feeling that's going to start happening pretty soon.
Indeed, and with this information, Charles, like as I said, this character provides a unique challenge because just that idea of gender and unlike many of the other characters where there's you can argue that there's something pretty basic at play in terms of, I mean, yeah, they may suffer from a multitude of other things on a smaller level, but primarily there's one major issue that we're talking about. But at least here, I mean, there's so many that come to mind. I mean, even thinking about how obsessive he is about taking on other people and taking on those identities. So I'm just curious, like, I'm at a loss. Like, what would you, in the context of what they have now, what's out there now in terms of providing a diagnosis for that? What would that look like?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. There is a tiny clue, Detective Comics number 478, where where this guy Clayface, sorry, I won't call him Mudface. Clayface is diagnosed with hyperpituitarism. And what hyperpituitarism is when your pituitary gland is overactive. And the pituitary stimulates your a variety of different things, your stress hormones, your thyroid, but also your gonads, your testicles or the ovaries. And so there can be a masculinizing effect for women or a feminizing effect for men. So it's kind of interesting that with this character, gender plays such a role, and there's kind of this blend because for someone with an overactive pituitary, A woman starts to look more masculine, and a guy starts to look more like a woman. And guys will have erectile dysfunction. They won't be able to perform. Women will grow hair. Also, people tend to get obese, very large. And so Clayface, you get a little sense that perhaps his psychosis, and when your pituitary overacts, it can affect your mental status. You can become psychotic, particularly if your thyroid is out of whack. So you get a sense that perhaps this guy's problem originated from a biological or hormonal abnormality. So that's the little clue that I got. And again, I turn to you all who know the details of this character far more. Obviously, there is criminality, like all of our characters. And changing from persona to persona is a superpower. It's not really psychopathology. The fact that he can, I was saying to Brandon earlier, he's kind of like a chameleon. That's a superpower. I don't know of any mental illness. But what's cool here is the relationship between a biologic abnormality and then how it presents itself over the different versions of Clayface.
As I said, it looks like we do have someone here, but as I said, for those of you that are watching, if you do have questions, or perhaps since we have the luxury of having a doctor here who can speak to it, if you have any questions regarding instances of these characters and perhaps some of the situations that have arisen with these characters, feel free to ask your questions. We are here for you guys. So if you want to ask one, I'm more than happy to present it, to the panelists that we have up here to talk further on it. But with that being said, as I said, we'll be able to rewind if we, as people bring in their questions, we will move into our third villain. Okay, so the next gentleman that we have, patient 3, if you will. He goes by the name Thomas Elliott. He was a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne, and as he grew, that relationship with Wayne actually, you can arguably say, got pretty twisted. Although the name that he goes by now, which is we know as Hush, even though it comes from a nursery rhyme, in terms of the way that he operates, he uses a lot of manipulation in the ways in which he tries to go after Bruce Wayne. But in just thinking of like that and the intensity of that relationship that he has with Wayne, the thing that comes to mind for me when we're thinking about it in a realistic context is just that concept of perhaps PTSD, just in terms of issues that you may have that can kind of get really twisted and affect any relationship just based on things that might happen from your childhood, or just traumatic events in general as you're developing as a human being, and how that can have really unfortunate and dark and scary results that can stem from that. But to speak further on that, Julian, leave it to you. Go ahead.
Okay, so Hush came about in the early 2000s when Jim Lee came back to DC and started drawing comics again. I think it was written by Jeff Loeb. It was a big story. Who was Hush? He teamed up with the Riddler in the first story because the Riddler finally figured out who Batman was, just like having an epiphany. Jason Todd is also connected to all this in terms of giving details on the game, because Jason Todd at the time wasn't completely back, but within canon he was salty because he died essentially. He died and then he was brought back through some weird comic book machinations. But Hush always has this thing with Bruce Wayne, trying to be smarter than him, also trying to be like him. obsessed with his story. You know, you have the original origin, which is kind of like he was a friend, but his dad was trash. So he was mad at his mom for like just being like abused and taking it. So he wanted to get rid of both of them and take their money and like get the money and just basically be free, be like an emancipated kid with like money. But then he envied Bruce because, you know, Bruce's origin, parents got killed in front of him, you know, after seeing a movie. So for some reason he envied Bruce's tragedy that he wished he had it. And it's this weird combination of like jealousy and envy and like looking up to, but also hating him at the same time. They changed the origin a little bit when they rebooted in 2011. That like he basically killed. They changed it that he actually killed his parents so that Bruce could be closer to him, which sounds like the plot of like something you would see on Lifetime channel. Like, you know, it's if you people want to have like type of slash fiction for Hush and Batman, or like unrequited love is there. Like there's a lot of fertile material there to explore that idea. But yeah, so he goes around and terrorizes Gotham over and over because he for some reason he's also mad because when he killed his dad, he was trying to kill his mom, but Thomas Wayne saved the mom, so he's mad at Thomas Wayne. It's a whole mess. And he runs around with a mummy, with like his bandages all around his face. He's shooting guns because he trained with Deadshot. So he's made essentially to be basically a dark Batman, and they like to do that every now and then. But the thing is that he's his old friend from the past, and that's essentially what Hush always is. It hasn't really expanded upon that. Like he's not a team up with the other villains type of guy. He uses the other villains. He will hurt them or kill them, try to kill them as much as he need be just to get Bruce Wayne and Batman. They use him in the game, in the third Arkham game. He's effectively, which they also mirror in the Batwoman show. I don't want to spoil that, but something happens at the end of that that mirrors things that happen in those games as well, because he is an interesting villain to use in terms of his, because very, very rarely do you see a person that obsessed with Bruce Wayne more than a Batman. Most of all the villains they don't know who Batman is. So they care about Batman and getting rid of Batman or whatever. But he literally cares too much for Bruce Wayne. And that's a good gist of the character, I feel.
Gotcha. And you know, with that information, Charles, you know, what would you say? Just that idea of, you know, obsessing over someone and being that intensely, you know, keyed in or honed in on one person. As I said, like one thing that comes to mind for me is post-traumatic stress, just in thinking of like perhaps things that have happened as he, you know, grew up, or his upbringing, since he is in, you know, and for all intents and purposes, like a dark mirror of Bruce Wayne. But with that being said, you know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great and interesting character. Again, what always fascinates me is how complex these folks are. So, alcoholic father, kind of an enabling mother, and so it's clear that this as a young kid, he was traumatized, and you know, one of the ways of dealing with that trauma is turning to criminality and murder. But you're right, there's this weird obsession with Bruce Wayne, and you get some clues here that it's not. So obsessive compulsive disorder would be where he obsesses, and then in order to stop obsessing, he has to compulsively do something. And that may be the case in terms of the killing. He may be a compulsive killer, like that's his way of dealing with this obsessive thinking. But that's one way to look at it. The other clue is, you know, he is a brilliant and meticulous surgeon. That's what we learn about him. And what we know about surgeons is they tend to have something called obsessive compulsive personality. And the reason we say that, and no offense to my surgeons or anyone who knows surgeons, many do not, of course, have a disorder, but in surgery, we select for people who are obsessive and compulsive in the sense of, you know, do you want the person who's like, oh, maybe I got the tumor out, or, oh, maybe I left a few bandages in your mother? No, you want the obsessive compulsive, brilliant person doing surgery. So that character trait is something that's part of this person, and it may be a defense. We often see that people who feel out of control in their life, the way they regain control is becoming hyper-focused in a profession or a skill. So there are definitely some obsessive compulsive traits, personality traits in this character. And then, the question is, does it cross the line into a delusion? I mean, what Julian said, this fixation on Bruce Wayne seems unhealthy. Like, it seems really kind of not grounded in reality. So there's sort of, this isn't, obsessive compulsiveness comes from anxiety, whereas delusionality comes more from psychosis. And we start to see that this guy kind of is crossing the line into a bit more of a psychotic process. So very, very complex individual.
Definitely. So, with all that being said, you would say in general for our for Tommy here, for the various issues that have at play that I've brought up, on a general basis, or even what Julian, you've fleshed out with many of the things that we've seen, with that character, in terms of the where he may fall. Would you say? I know, and you dropped a lot of the various issues or various possible diagnoses that we have. If we're thinking of it on a scale, would you say in terms of those two issues that it's tilting one way on one end, or is it kind of hard to really determine that?
I'm going to be a good psychiatrist and say I need more information. I mean, sort of Julian said, this character is a newer, we don't have 6 iterations of this character like we did with some of the other ones. And so I think we're still, or maybe the authors are still trying to figure him out, because I see elements of all these things, but I can't conclusively come down with what exactly is going on. I get a psychotic feel, but I also get an obsessive compulsive feel. And so I'd need more information.
All right. Awesome. Well, this is what we can do, gentlemen. Since we do have some time, I'm gonna, bring it over to you guys to, talk about where folks can find you. And what we can do is, if you guys are open to it, because it looks like we still have folks that are a little shy to ask their questions, which is fine. You guys are more than welcome to, drop your questions afterwards, and in us discussing, where folks can find us. I can make sure that a lot of these questions about, what we discussed today gets to each of you, so that way we can, have a continued dialogue and talk further about it. So with that being said, I will pass it along to you, Julian, first, of where folks can find you.
They can find me online on social media, Julian Lytle, JulianLytle. I'm on all the known social media things. By that, I go by my name. I have a Patreon for my podcast called Ignorant Bliss. Patreon.com, Julian Lytle. And that's it right now for the most part. I had a story come out on the Swamp Thing Halloween special, Legend of the Swamp Thing Halloween Spectacular. If you can find it, you can buy the digital one easy on readdc.com. But if you find a physical copy, it might be at comic book stores. That's it. Just if you want to talk to me on social media, that's fine. I'll reply eventually.
It's my turn, right, Brandon? So I am Charles Seminole at GW University. My online presence is very poor. I'm the opposite of an influencer. I'd be a defluencer or something, like no clout whatsoever. But there's only very few people with my last name. If you look me up, my brother's a weatherman and my father's a psychologist. So you want to go with Charles if you need to find me, just Google me. At GW, and if there's anything I can be of help with, either in terms of characters, or if you need a referral or question in your area related to psychiatry, I'm always happy to help.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's actually fitting. You say, just Google me. That is a phrase that's out there. Just Google me. But be that as it may, guys, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, moderator, host and co-creator of Movies and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for those of you that were watching. As I said, if you have any questions regarding, a lot of the characters that we touched on today, feel free to drop it in the comments, and just so we can, so you guys have an opportunity to chat further about it. And I can make sure that it gets to, each of the folks that we have that were here as panelists: Julian Lytle, Charles Seminole. You can find us on Facebook, which is being live streamed now, of course. However, you can also find us on YouTube for any of the episodes that we have that we do as an encore episode of our live streams. You can find us on Twitter at Move and Shake UNLTD, Instagram at Movers Shakers Unlimited, and of course, lastly, you can find me, Brandon Choi ENT, on Twitter, and Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. Thanks so much for watching. Be safe out there, everyone, and see you soon. Till next time. Bye.